G'day, welcome to another edition of The Geek Teacher, teaching you to program, or an introduction to programming in Visual Basic. Today we're going to be looking at some list boxes and how we can use that to create a tennis draw that you can see on the screen in front of you. And we're going to be using this to do it. We're doing this so that it can lead into looking at arrays and collections. Now the beautiful thing about a list box is that it is an indexed or a zero indexed collection of items in a list. So starts at first item is 0 and the last item is whatever the last item is. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and on. And the beauty of that is that it allows us to then work with the index. Now the index is something that you'll find goes across both the lists and arrays and string arrays and collections, and we're going to be using a lot more of that throughout our programming experience. Now with this list box, it's going to be a fairly simple program that we're starting on today. We're going to be creating a program that lets us add names to a list box, and then when we click on a button, creates a tennis draw where every player plays every other player. Now it's going to look something like this that you can see on the screen in front of you. We have the names of Bob, Jane, Milhouse and Mary over here. Bob, Jane, Milhouse and Mary. And then over here the final draw will be Bob versus Jane, Bob versus Milhouse, Bob versus Mary, then Jane versus Milhouse, Jane versus Mary, and Milhouse versus Mary. Now you can see that there's a little bit of a pattern going on there, and that's really important to recognize. Now we are sure that I'm sure that every player has played every other player because of the way that this list has been constructed. Now I'll show you what I mean by grabbing this pen. I'll grab this and I will make it a, there we go, good, orange, fantastic. Why not a bit of orange? Now, what we're going to do is, man, my screen's got high res. What we're going to do is I'm going to go through this and show you how it works. So we've got Bob here playing Jane, and that's Bob playing Jane over here. And then we've got Bob playing Milhouse, so we're playing the one underneath Jane. Important to hold on to that idea, which is Bob versus playing Milhouse over here, and then Bob playing Mary, which is, wow, my resolution is causing issues here, I can't even see it. Bob versus Mary, which is here. Why don't I use my finger? Beauty of a touchscreen. Then what we have going on, look at that, don't you love the Surface Pro? Then what we've got going on is Jane versus Milhouse. Jane versus Milhouse. So notice we went down from Bob. We actually went down one from Bob to Jane, and we're doing the same thing. Jane to the next one, and then Jane to Mary, which is this one here. And again, we're going to do that and move down another one. So go down to 3 and Milhouse versus Mary. Now if you look at that, Bob has played Jane, Milhouse and Mary, which means Jane has played Bob, Milhouse has played Bob, and Mary's played Bob. Then we've got moving down to Jane playing Milhouse and Jane playing Mary, which means that Jane's played Bob, Jane's played Milhouse, and Jane's played Mary. Then when we go down to Milhouse and Milhouse versus Mary, we know already that Milhouse has played Jane and Bob because that happened earlier in the draw, and now Milhouse has played Mary. And if we go to Mary, notice there's no Mary there because Mary's already played everyone. Mary's played Milhouse, Mary's played Jane, and Mary's played Bob. So by doing it this way, where we start at the top and then start iterating down, so 1 plays 2, 1 plays 3, 1 plays 4, go down to 2, 2 plays 3, 2 plays 4, go down to 3, 3 plays 4, and so on. For as long a list as we want, we can create an algorithm here where we can loop through a list of names and automatically create a draw regardless of the size of that list. Now that is tops. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to pop back over to Visual Basic here, which I've got open already. This is it here. You'll notice that I have called it Tennis Draw. So I created this basic Windows program and named it Tennis Draw. Other than that, I've done absolutely nothing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to start adding things to my form. We are going to need a text box for the names. There we go, there's a text box to add names. We're going to need a button to add that name to something, and that something is going to be a list box, because if you're going to be working with the list, why not actually use something that's built for working with lists? Notice that I'm just double clicking on them and adding them. I'm not actually doing anything with them at this point. I'm just simply adding them. So then I've got a text box, which I'm going to type my names in, a button which will take that and stick it in the list box. Then I need a button which will create my drawer, and I need something to put that drawer in. And I'm going to use a text box for that. And you're going, hang on, you just said use a list box to create a list. Yes, I did, and we could use another list box to do this, but I like the idea of using a text box here because I want to show you something about text boxes that you may not have come across before. And then I'm going to have a button perhaps to exit the program. And it is always a good idea. Remember, one of my mantras in IPT is that your user is not you. Right, so what that means is you're a developer, you have some idea about how to get around, you know that there's a wonderful little X up in the top right hand corner, you know that pressing Alt F4 will exit it. An exit button, however, is something that some people go looking for, and we need to be able to design our programs for the average Joe. So bear that in mind when you're developing your programs. It actually makes more sense to click on a button marked exit than to click on an X. We know that the X means exit, but your users aren't always that cluey, so just bear that in mind. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of buttons for clearing our lists. Notice I just double clicked and it stuck that over there, so there's a button that I'm going to use to clear that list, and I'm going to stick another one over here. Notice, of course, those lines that are showing up on the screen. That helps me know that they're actually lined up, and it helps me with my formatting so it looks kind of reasonable. Now you'll notice that this doesn't look like much. That text box there is a single line. I can't make it bigger. And this is one of the things I wanted to show you. When I've got that text box selected, if I come over here to my properties box, you'll notice right down the bottom, this is my text box 2, right down the bottom, you can see text, it's automatically selected, yeehaw. But this multi-line here is what we're looking for. If I double click on multi-line, you'll notice that all of a sudden I get these two control options here where I can now drag it down. And the benefit of that is that I can add more than one line of text. The default, like this one up here, is that it's one line of text. Multi-line lets me work with multiples, and if you're working with a text editor, which I know you've done and all that kind of stuff, then you're going to want multi-line. The other thing you might be looking for is scroll bars. I don't have any. I'm going to look for vertical scroll bars. There we go. I can put both if I want, but I don't want. So I'm just going to put vertical, and they will look like that grayed out until I go over the page. If I don't put them in, they don't magically appear. You actually need to tell it that you need the scroll bars. Right, so now what I've got is a whole bunch of stuff on a form. None of it's been named, which is going to get tricky when I'm working with it. It's kind of generic. And we have something called a naming convention. We're going to be looking at that in this moment, because when you name something, it's like me being able to say, hey Bob, come over here, rather than hey you, and there's a whole classroom full of people, they don't know who. Being able to name something specifically, very important. So this is my form. I'm actually going to name my form. Notice I have text here. I can work with that, but I'm just going to go around and name everything first so I don't forget. So click on the form, go to your properties, select name. Now I like to use this A to Z order. The other order is by grouping, so design, layout and stuff. I like A to Z because I know the properties I'm looking for. Helps me just find things quickly because I'm also an English teacher and alphabet is my thing. So what I'm looking for here, I'm going to name my form. FRM is the preface that I use for forms. So FRM means form, and then it's going to be my main form. And the reason that we do that, name these things, is so that when I'm coding, I can type in, for example, TXT for text box, and it will give me a list of all my text boxes. I don't have to then go TEXT and I get all this wonderful who knows what. Plus, by naming them, I know what they're going to be about. So my FRM main, it's my main form. If I have lots of forms, I know that this one's the main one. So this text box here, I'm going to name TXT name. There we go. This button, notice what I'm doing, by the way. I'm not coming back over to the naming property. I'm actually just clicking on it. So if there's a property, if you're working on a property in one control, and then you move to another one, if it has the same property, it will automatically be selected. So you can just start typing. How much easier is that? I'm going to call this btn add because we're going to add the name into the list box, which takes me to the list box. I'm going to call this list LST names. Right, so LST names for list names. Kind of makes sense. When you're coding, you go, wow, that makes sense. btn create. because we're going to create the drawer. This one's going to be txt drawer because it's our drawer. This is going to be btn clear names. Right, so that one's going to clear the list box there. This one is going to be called btn clear drawer because it's going to clear our drawer. Now those buttons are really just optional extras. They're there so that you can quickly remove items. Otherwise you have to exit the program and come back in because we're not going to build it in otherwise. And of course we need our exit button. So surprise, surprise, btn exit. Now what we can do is go through and make it look a little bit better. So we're going to add some text and watch what it does. I come down to the text on the form and I'm going to call this tennis drawer. And notice it changed the caption. So text on the form changes the caption. Come to my button. This is button 1, which is btn add now. Button 1 doesn't make much sense. But if we go add name, there we go. Look at that. It doesn't make much sense because it's kind of wrapped it. So we just make that a little bit bigger, like that. Cool. Now let's make all our buttons look the same. Just going to select them all like that and then come up here to format. Make same size in both, and that will automatically spread them out so that they're consistent. May not be able to center it perfectly though. Now, if I do that, let's just reorganize them so that they actually make sense. Look at that, that's very close. I don't like that. There we go. Let's move that up. There we go. So now that's looking a bit better. Okay. LST names, we don't need to add any text to that. Button 2, we're going to call create. See what that looks like? Looks fantastic. This is going to be clear, ... so they know that it's going to clear it, and this one's going to be clear as well. Notice with the text, doesn't matter if the text is the same as another button. Oh, that looks horrible. Doesn't matter if the text looks the same as another button, as long as the names are different. You can't have more than one thing named the same thing. Then this one, of course, is going to be exit. Now I'm going to put something in for all us old fogies out there, which is an ampersand, the and symbol, just before the X. And what that does is it underlines the X, as you can see, but it means that when the program's running, us oldies who remember all the keyboard shortcuts, we can go Alt-X and it'll close the program for us, or run whatever code is under there. So now we've got that. It's very simple. I haven't added any labels to explain what stuff is. I can do that. That would be smart. Let's add a label to this one. Let's add a label to this one. And let's add a label to this one there. Right. So notice I'm actually not going to name these. I'm just going to say add name, list of, let's call it players, and let's call this one the drawer. Awesome. So now we actually know what each one of those is. If I run it by pressing F5, you'll notice that it just looks like that and nothing does anything. Yeehaw. Okay, so let's go in and add some code. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go around my form and comment what I'm actually going to do, which will allow me to come back and actually have a clear idea and understanding. So I always start with the exit button because it's the easiest. We're going to end the program with this one, and it is always a good idea to comment your code. End is very simple. So I'm going to add the code for that one straight away. End ends the program. Surprise! Add name. I'm going to add the text from txt names name to LST names. There you go. That's pretty much all it's going to do. Create. This one is going to loop through, not with an E, loop through the names list and create the drawer in txt drawer. Awesome. I'm going to come back to that because there's actually more to it. This is going to be clear the name, clear, well, why don't we just say clear LST names, and this one's going to be clear txt drawer. Now I'm going to start with these ones straight up. Notice all I did was double click on the buttons and it took me straight to it. Remembering of course that Visual Basic is an event-driven programming language, which means it needs an event to run the code associated with that event. So a button has a click event, which is initiated when a user clicks on the button, thus the click event, and then you can run the code, you can associate code with that click event, and it will run it when that happens. There are other events like form load. I might actually include that in this one, where we're going to set the focus to the text box so it's automatically there, ready for you to type your name in. But we'll see whether or not that fits in. So I'm going to clear the names list to start with, because that's fairly easy to do. Remember, notice because I said LST names, I automatically get my list box up, nothing else. Otherwise I'm doing this thing, look at that, I've got all these lists, horrible. LST though, it's automatically going to be my list box. I'm not going to type the rest of that in. I'm going to show you a shortcut. I'm just going to press dot to get the properties. Then I'm going to type in items, and then I'm going to type in clear. Right, so what this says is it's going to clear the items collection from the list. Pretty simple. We're going to do a similar thing with txt draw. Again, notice I'm not finishing it, and I've only got my two text boxes, txt draw.clear, and it's going to clear the draw as well. Coming back here, I need to add some names to my list box so I can create my draw. Now, what am I doing here? Adding the text from txt name to lst names. Okay, so what am I adding it to? I'm adding it to lst names dot items dot, notice I'm not finishing it off, dot items dot, now let's have a look at this. Can I just go to add? I can. I'm going to open my brackets, and I'm going to go txt name dot text, bam. How good is that? Let's just check to make sure everything's working as we expect. So here we go, add name Bob, bam, it added. Now I've got to click back in here, clear that, add name. That's we might make it so that we can clear that as well. Clearing the list box works. Type some text in, clear that, that works as well. Does exit work? Because that's kind of important. Exit works as well. Excellent. Now we're going to in this button add, we're going to make it so that it sets the focus back on the text box after it clears it. So let's just say what we're going to do. We're going to clear txt name, and then we're going to set the focus back on it. Now what that will do is put the cursor back in that box, so I don't have to be clicking around. Makes it a bit faster. Oh wow, my E came back. Okay, so we're going to go, what's it called? Txt name. Just like with draw, we can just go clear, and it clears it. Now we're going to go txt name dot focus. Now in theory, that should work. Let's try that. Add, oh look, it's back there, it's cleared it. I can just keep typing. How cool is that? That's pretty cool. Okay, wouldn't it be great if we made sure that happened on form load? Two ways of doing this. I can double click on the form, which will take me to form load. But you'll also notice that up here I've got a list of all my controls and objects, and over here is a list of all their events that they can do. So form main load, on form main load, I can then say txt name dot focus. Let's make sure that works. What do you know? It does. Excellent. Just add a comment there. Now I've got one bit of code left, and this is the important one. This takes this list and puts it in here. Now if we come back and have a look at this slideshow again, we can see, oh, let me get back to my cursor. Laser pointer, there you go. We can see that Bob, right, so the first one goes to the second one, the first one goes to the third one, the first one goes to the fourth one. Then it moves down one and does the same thing again. That one goes to the next one, then it goes to the one after, then it moves down. So we've got a loop happening here. I'm hoping you're seeing that. We've got a loop. We can make it simple so we don't have to try to figure out how many people are in this drawer and then try to calculate how we need to do it and write heaps of lines of code, because that would be really actually impossible to account for everyone. Instead, what we need to do is we can use a loop, but we're going to put a loop inside the loop, because we need a loop that will go from the first to the last, just to get that player there, that first one. But at the same time, inside that loop, it needs to go from the first to last, but for each one of those, it also then needs to go from the next one to the last. You see what I'm saying there? So for the first one, it needs to look at the next one and go to the last. Then it needs to move down to the next one and look at the next one to the last. So we're going through that way. Hopefully that's making some sense. I'm going to come back to here and I'm going to look at this create drawer. So I'm going to loop through the names and create the drawer in txt drawer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use create a couple of variables, I, j as integer, right? So they're going to store the position that we're in the list. So I is going to be the position of, it's going to be holding the index or the number of the person that we're looking at for the first column. J is going to be looking at the ones that come after that. So I will be Bob, J will be Jane, Millhouse, and then Mary, I think it is, it's on my list. Okay, does that make sense? I hope so, because this is what we're going to do. I'm going to say for I equals 0 to lstnames dot items dot count, and I'm actually going to put a -1 in there, and you're going, hang on, I think you want to go to the last item, and I do. Now I'm going to explain this very quickly now, because list boxes, arrays, and collections are 0 indexed. Now what that means is that the index starts counting at 0. So the first item in a list actually has an index of 0, because computers start with 0. But when we count something, we don't count from 0. So you know that's not 0 apples, 1 apple, because 0 apple actually means something completely different to us. We start counting at 1 when we count up. So we go 1 apple, 2 apple. Lists and arrays and so forth are the same. They have an index that starts at 0, so that uniquely identifies each item, but we count starting at 1. So in this case, we're going to be saying from 0, the index is going to be 0, but we want to get to the last item. And the way to find the last item is to do a count. It starts at 1, but then we have to align it with our 0 index, which means we have to take 1 off. So if there was one item in the list, its index would be 0, its count would be 1. To make that match, we need to say count -1. So it'll be 0 equals 1 minus 1, which is 0. So 0 equals 0. That's what you want. Awesome. So that's going to be holding the first name in our list. Now we need to look at going through the second name. And for this one, we need to go to the next item to the end of the list. So this bit here is going to be exactly the same. It's just this bit that we need to worry about. So this is where J comes in handy. For J equals, now the item that we're looking at that we need to find the next one from is I. So if we say for J equals I plus 1, that then takes it to the very next item from I, regardless of what I is. So if we've gone down our list and we're on item number 3, it's going to look for number 4 here. Okay, and then it's going to keep going down from that. It's not looking at the ones before, because otherwise people will be playing twice. So for J equals I plus 1 to lstnames.items.count -1, this is where the cool bit is. Alright, this is where we're going to take the item that's at I and the item that's at J and say I versus J. Pretty simple, right? That's what we're going to do. I'm going to say txt draw, because that's where we want it. Dot text, because it's a text box, equals txt draw dot text. Why am I saying that? So that anything that's in there when we're looping, it doesn't get overwritten. It just keeps adding to it. Txt draw dot text, and because we're going to add some stuff, LST names. Where's our first name? It's in items. Awesome. Dot item, and it's at I, isn't it? So the first item, the person that we're starting with on our list, the person who's going to verse the other person, that's I. The competitor is J. So we've got that, and I'm going to add a V with a bit of spacing. Okay, notice at the end there is joining our strings, LST names dot items dot item J, and then I'm going to put a return in, a Visual Basic carriage return line feed. That's how I remember it, which then we'll just put an answer sign in so that next time we add a player, it's going to play underneath. That, in theory, is it. Let's go see if that works. Okay, we've got Bob, Bob, Jane, tab and space for me, Millhouse, and Mary. Awesome. So Bob, Jane, Millhouse, and Mary. That's pretty much the same as this list here. Bob, Jane, Millhouse, and Mary. So it should turn out exactly the same. Let's try that. Let's click on Create. Bob versus Jane, Bob versus Millhouse, Bob versus Mary, Jane versus Millhouse, Jane versus Mary, and then Millhouse versus Mary. And what do you know? That's exactly the same. So this is part of the fun of using lists, is that we can then use the index in there to count through, and that is exactly what we're looking for. So in our next session, we're going to look at arrays and look at how the zero index of that works as well, and I'll see you then.